we have Sandra Duff here as a guest. She's from Jackman, and they do customer engagement reinvention. And I'm so curious to find out what that means and how people use that service to reinvent themselves. And I see that, Sandra, you guys have 100 reinventionists in your company. So I think it's a fascinating topic. People are always trying to figure out how to disrupt themselves and reinvent themselves. So I think we're going to have a great conversation here. But if you can take a few minutes and tell us a little bit about your background, where you come from, what got you into doing what you're doing, and anything else you might want to add in. So welcome to the show, Sandra.
Thank you so much. Great to be here. So I'll start with a little bit about me and then a little bit about Jackman. I'm a retail junkie at heart. I learned this early on in my career. I really enjoy fast-paced environment. I love change. I love building things quickly and then seeing them through to execution. And retail has really been a great way to do that. I've been both client side, primarily in apparel and grocery, and then agency side, helping retailers build their brands for over, almost 20 years. So it's certainly been a career that's always been fascinating for me and ever changing. A bit about Jackman. You talked about leading a company of reinventionists, and what does that entail, and who are we, and what do we do? The best way to describe it is that it is like a management consulting firm with real primary research and customer insights, married with a creative agency and a team that knows how to get it done. That perfect trifecta of being able to build a strategy based on real human insights and then bring it to life in real time with our partners and clients is really what drives Jackman. We are not solely retail focused. We are, consumer focused, and then we also do select B2B reinventions as well. So we have some great partners that we've worked with over the years that we continue to help them pivot and really bring a new customer focus to life.
Nice. That's really cool. I mean, obviously, in this day and age with technology, understanding customers, you got to really have your ear to the ground to figure out what customers want and be able to pivot your business accordingly, right? So clearly, exactly. Data must be something that's very important to you, right?
Yes, it is. We have a robust research team within our strategy practice. And they conduct primary segmentation as well as qualitative research. And since COVID, we've been really keeping our pulse on what's going on with the consumer. We've been fielding quarterly primary research studies just to see what consumer sentiment is, not just in terms of tactical, where spend is going, but also what are their underlying values and behaviors and attitudes, and how are they feeling with everything that's going on right now in their lives.
And what's going to be fascinating, it sounds like from your perspective, is looking at those insights across different retail sectors and channels, right? Like what people are thinking in apparel versus grocery versus some of the other sectors you work in.
Correct. And even we see, we're in Canada, but we field a US study and a Canadian study. And it's even interesting to see the difference across the two countries in North America. It's really fascinating to see that comparison and where consumers are where their minds are at.
So do you see differences in retail verticals in terms of how mindsets have shifted?
What we see is their underlying values and attitudes are agnostic of vertical. So if somebody really cares about social responsibility, they're looking for a retailer that is part of their community and is, behaving as a good corporate citizen in that community. But what we are seeing are, we do test and say, where is spend going and where do they anticipate spend to go? And that's where we start to see a shift, especially in, we've been seeing everything that everyone else has been seeing, an explosion in home goods and a reduction in apparel spend. But what's interesting is also, we did a special food study because we wanted to see what's happening with respect to grocery versus restaurant takeout versus meal kits, et cetera. And so you do see some of those verticals change a little bit over time, especially since the beginning of COVID.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I'm wondering if if lowered spending, let's say in apparel, because people aren't going out, there's no need to buy new clothes. If that's being redirected to other retail sectors where there's now increased spending in, let's say, food, and now choosing to buy organic or the more slightly pricier items because you have a little more budget available now to have more choice. Do you see stuff like that happening?
Yeah, and what's interesting is like our latest study in May, we asked, where they think that they're going to start spending more, because we heard about this trend of revenge spending, and we wanted to see, is it actually real? Is there this pent up desire to travel, and now that's where I'm going to put my dollars? Or do I want to get dressed up again and now see an explosion in apparel? What consumers told us they would do is that they would really hold their spending flat, with the exception of food. And what's difficult to uncover is, are they still anticipating, their food spend? We've all seen their food spend increase over COVID, both due to just eating at home much more often, but also because of, there is some inflation in the market right now. But that's where there's, 22% of consumers said they're going to think about their grocery bill increasing over time.
Hmm. So you focus a lot on customer engagement. What are some of the commonalities you see across some of the different sectors in terms of best practices or how to improve or increase customer engagement versus what are some of the key differences?
Well, I think what's really interesting is that all retailers have had to do quite a bit of catch up in terms of how to engage and think about the customer experience. It has always been a little bit of a siloed business, with in-store and e-com being separate businesses. So I think the past year, universally, all different retail verticals have had to start to think through how to connect the dots for their customer and how to provide that seamless experience, which I think has benefited all of retail. I think grocery has certainly had a lot more of the heavy lifting to do over time, because they certainly were a laggard in the e-commerce side in many instances. And what was always having been at a grocer, the impossible dream was always, we need to get more sales to e-commerce, but people want to touch and feel their groceries. And so this year has been really pivotal for them. I think, as we think about customer engagement, when you think about an apparel vertical, to me, that needs to shift a little bit more. What they need to measure in terms of in-store experience and what that looks like needs to be a little bit different, especially when you think also about in-stock position and when you're in store and you have a captive audience, and anyways, it's a little bit of a different experience now, and I don't think we're quite there. So I think apparel needs to really think through what that in-person physical retail needs to look like.
So, so do you think there's going to be a certain categories in the retail vertical or even within the grocery vertical that will suffer in the longer term, or you see the downturn is going to remain or the new normal is going to sustain? You think that's...
Yeah, I think that the new normal will sustain. I think that people have really adjusted. What we saw with consumers in this last study is they've really become accustomed to what's here. The biggest change happened in 2020, and consumers are stabilizing in terms of their attitudes and their expectations. They've now realized that this is the way it's going to be for the next foreseeable near term. And they've really stabilized in terms of their adaptation. And so we don't see, any big market shifts moving forward. Certainly not the big swings that we saw previously. I actually think there will be a reinforcement or a retrenchment of their own personal values. So if you're a customer segment that really enjoys, for instance, or is really all about being part of the community, as I mentioned, or, being very, interested in organic or sustainability, et cetera, you've really retrenched those values versus somebody who's much more price sensitive. That also has been reinforced during this time. So I think that, the survey said, people have adjusted. They feel like they've stabilized. And they're feeling like, they're kind of well armed to deal with what's ahead. So I don't think that we'll see those big pivots necessarily in terms of how they behave.
Thinking back or thinking about customer engagement again, one of the trends that I think we're seeing out there is a blending of sort of the digital world and the physical world of shopping. Certainly everyone today using their smartphones while they're in the store, browsing online, ordering products online, et cetera. But watching what Amazon doing, I think is really interesting, is they bring Alexa into the store. So now you've got voice assistants available to you to help you understand how to pick a ripe avocado or whatever.
Yep.
Smart carts with a screen on it where you can access your Amazon account, your shopping list, and so on. But what are you seeing around that space and anything new and different happening there?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that there's a lot of trial and error, a lot of testing going on in the market right now. We do also see assistance with fulfillment in terms of footwear. We've seen where you can actually, come into the store, try on a size, try on shoes, not fit quite right, but get the right size shipped to you, or have a system where that inventory is readily available to the associate and somebody's running in behind the scenes to get that, so you're not leaving the associate. We've seen that type of thing be really effective. I think that some of the more mass retailers still do struggle with blending those two. We've seen Walmart do some interesting things in terms of queuing and cash out, et cetera. But I think it's that learning piece. And I think what remains undefined for me in a real way is, what is the role of that physical channel now? Because we've seen so much of this blend happening. What are consumers really looking for when they go to a physical channel? And what do they want that experience to be? And it could look very different when you're in a more fulfillment category like grocery versus more of a want category, like you're putting together an outfit for a job interview,
Right.
for instance.
Yeah.
Where do you see, I'm sorry, Gary, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, to reinforce that, in grocery, I think certainly a lot of the utility shopping, replenishment is already gone online. We're going to see more of it go online. I think people, to be, lured to a physical store, it's really got to focus around either education, help me learn something about the food or the different products that I'm interested in, or entertainment. Right, help me understand what new things I can present, or
Experience. Yeah.
That type thing.
Yeah. I do feel there's also a role for some sort of, it's not quite the same thing as going out to dinner, but to do home meal replacement in a really interesting way to get that footfall on a more regular basis. I think grocers have really, not all of them have excelled at this. Wegmans is great at this, but what's on special this week? Like what flavors of, soups or pizzas or sandwiches, to kind of create that rotation. I think what's really hard is groceries done itself a disservice. They went into HMR and it stayed the same. It's still rotisserie chicken, it's still wedges, it's still the standard stuff, macaroni salad, potato salad. How can we break that a little bit more and create a bit more of a menu to really engage and seek visits? Because I think people still want that. Now, that could, of course, be fulfilled by Uber Eats for sure. But I think that there's still a segment of the population that really wants to go in and just see and taste and kind of have a more sensory experience as part of the food side.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you also talk about, I think retailers should be more focused about engaging, connecting with communities of consumers as opposed to direct messaging. That's a fascinating concept, because obviously, when I think of going to my local supermarket, I really don't think about connecting with other consumers at that supermarket, right?
Yeah.
It's all happenstance and incidental. There is no real community around the shoppers at the supermarket, and this is something that we've thought about internally as well. So you're saying that, hey, that could be a way of driving engagement, loyalty. What are your thoughts on
I think
messaging versus communicating with communities?
Yeah.
That's an interesting panel.
Yeah, we think there's a real opportunity here because if you think about it, some of the great brands that we all know and love, like Lululemon, does a great job of generating this community of people who are engaged in a certain lifestyle. And in food, there's some really great, grocery brands. HEB is one of them, where they have fans. They have real advocates that are not, social media bot influencers, but that are in your local community. I think I saw one article about HEB in Texas when they had the big power outage that they were more effective than a government agency in terms of water distribution to local residents, and just how they can be such an important part of that community. There's real power in that, and there's real authenticity in that. And so is there a way for brands to start thinking about how to harness that? The way that Lululemon has done that is through the fitness ambassadors and really leveraging their local followings to become part of the Lululemon experience. And so I think that there's a real opportunity there for grocery brands to think through what makes them irresistible to their communities. And certainly I worked for one where the family and the family tradition was part of that. And that was also through recipes and through sharing of some of that content, which becomes more sticky and magnetic than pushing out a promotion or pushing out a weekly flyer, as a way to really extend the roots into local communities and use your teams that are on the ground in terms of store managers and regional managers to really solidify those relationships with key organizations within the community as well.
I ran across something really interesting with, I think speaks to the same point, which is, I have one of these doorbell cameras, and there's an app associated with it. And there's a whole bunch of people in my community who have the same doorbell camera, and they have, there's almost like a social media around these people.
Mhm.
And so you get alerts in the local area about, hey, I saw this, wild cat or brown
Yes.
bear area. And it's amazing because you now have a device which you intended to look to see who's at your door, and you're able to now leverage that. And so there's an added value now to that product, not just as a doorbell camera, but beyond that, because you're now connected to people. And I think it makes perfect sense that me and 5,000 other people in my town go to the same supermarket to shop, to leverage that and create that sense of community, right? I think it makes,
Exactly.
yeah, I think it's the
Yeah.
best.
And I think just thinking out loud, where I think grocers could really expand on that idea is around health and wellness related communities. A number of people have diabetes or high blood pressure or different health conditions or lifestyle interests, right? Vegan or whatever. Those are almost natural communities that grocery retailers could really pick up on.
Yeah, I think that's a great nuance, because if I think about, Loblaw is Canada's largest grocer here, and pre-COVID, they have these community centers in their Loblaw's banner stores, and that's where the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts meet. That's where Weight Watchers has its meetings, but just that's a physical space.
Yeah.
How can you now turn that into a virtual environment where you are still gathering and sharing, that community space, if you will,
Yeah.
and also tapping into not necessarily your own branded community. How can you help those communities in the places that they're already interacting connect further? And so finding ways to do that, I think it's uncharted territory for sure, and it's really hard for grocers because they're used to a real regimented marketing spend around promotion and flyer that needs to drive the business. But I do think now is the kind of turning point for them to start to think about themselves as a community partner and as a real good corporate citizen, and start to think about, is that an inflection point that they can push with their customers to really create a difference in customers' minds? Because now customers are all of a sudden in a year of change, not just during COVID, but a year of social change,
Right.
where we've seen a lot more diversity and inclusion issues come up. That is much more top of mind than we've ever seen before.
Right, right. No, I completely agree. I think retail at large is at an inflection point, and I think more so supermarkets have come into focus, obviously in the last 18 months, becoming the center of our lives like we never imagined before.
Yes.
So I think it's an opportunity, really, and then, which brings you to the next point, which is what kind of brands and businesses you think are best positioned to who are ready to embrace the change that's going to happen. It's going to happen because consumers are changing, and your business has to change to adapt to them. So who do you think, what kind of brands and businesses do you think are in the best position to actually take advantage of that?
I'm going to go outside of the normal like verticals, et cetera. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the ethos of some of these brands. I think brands that have been nimble in their past will continue to be able to pivot in a more appropriate way to the future. So if you think about, the Nikes of the world, if you think about, some of the, even Starbucks, like just, they're contracting a little bit, but they're very nimble in terms of how they actually go to market and how they think. I think that that's really important. I think other organizations that have a commitment to being good corporate citizens are also ones that are going to be, set up for the future. And I think about those as not necessarily, the big mammoth organizations, but certainly the HEBs, some of them may be smaller regional players that are doing quite well. I think that they have a good advantage over the behemoths like Amazon and Walmart, because I think they've really spent the time to find a differentiating point of view. And that certainly will help them differentiate their products moving forward and their services. So I think that that's really, those two things to me are really key in terms of, being able to sustain and grow during the next little while. I think it will remain hard for some legacy businesses. There are some legacy businesses that are really, we've seen department stores and the demise of department stores. That question mark is still there. I think their case for change has been there for a long time, but a lot of them have survived. So, we'll see, what's to bear. But I think legacy businesses continue to have a hard go of it, just because of their heavy infrastructure, heavy costs makes them less nimble in order to be able to move forward.
Do you think it's also a executive will type of thing? I mean,
100%. Yeah.
I find
really,
that a lot of these changes have to, at least in these big companies, they have to happen top down because these are corporate structures, relatively rigid.
Yeah.
You can't have a bottom-up approach here. It has to be a top-down approach for it to be effective, right?
Yeah, it's funny. We work with leadership teams all across North America, and for us, one of the most, we know when we meet with organizations and leaders, it's we really part of us deciding to work together is also on us to think through, will this organization be set up for change because of the leadership team? And when we identify our core target, it is a future focused leader. It is somebody who's focused on where we're going, is okay with taking risks and trying new things and testing into them, and is okay with breaking the paradigms of the past. And so that's a big determinant in terms of the future success of organizations.
Yeah. So you have some examples of some of the reinventions you guys have done that you think our listeners would be interested in hearing? I mean,
yeah, for sure.
Many interesting projects here.
Yeah, we've done, when we talk about reinventions, we talk about capital R reinventions, so overhaul of the entire business versus small R reinventions, which might be more of a product focus, et cetera. A couple of things that we've been most proud of, I would say, during this last little bit, and then I'll talk about some bigger ones that we've also worked on. We were certainly proud to be part of Flow Water's initial IPO. They're a alkaline-based water product here out of Canada, and they just went public. I want to say it's less than a month ago, so super excited to be part of that leadership team pivot to growth. We've also been part of a small brand called Simply Protein, which has, reinvented the protein bar category. So we're helping them pivot, position their business. A couple of the larger pieces of work that we've done, we've been doing work with Greenleaf, also in the food space, which is a plant-based protein company that owns both Light Life and Green Field Roast, and both of those have been repositioned, repackaged, remarketed, and proud to have our team have done that work in partnership with the Greenleaf leadership team. Some of our legacy retail case studies are Joanne's Fabrics and Crafts. We worked with them, I believe, back in 2018, and they're still rolling out the strategy that we worked on together. And then Staples, both north of the border and south of the border on both the consumer side and B2B side. That work is currently still in progress, and we're actively engaged with helping them roll out their strategy.
So when you approach these clients come to you and they're looking for help to reinvent, what are some of the kind of like, let's say, basic thumb rules of, hey, what are the questions that you ask that you think are important to be asked to help you discover the answers?
Sure. We answer 3 simple questions. They're very simple questions, but they're hard to unpack and land on. And we ask the entire leadership team to land on these. Who's the core customer that we're going to focus on? And that's going to be the person or the customer that we focus on primarily, and not worry about everything and everybody else, but just really zero in on one customer. And that's got data behind it, and that's got share of wallet as well as attitudes and behaviors. Once we land on that customer, how are we going to win with them? What's our competitive advantage? What are we going to deliver to them that nobody else can deliver? And then the third piece is really around how are we going to differentiate that experience? And that's really where that experience comes to life. Once we've got those 3, we can create for them that positioning of that North Star. And that really packages up for everybody exactly what we're going to build. And then we go and create from there, of course. What does that look like? And that's the magic of the work that we do at Jackman. But those are the 3 questions we answer in a very simple form. It is hard. It is hard because, our founder always says strategy is all about making choices. But once you do, it gets crystal clear. And not only does your leadership team fully align behind that, but your organization understands it and can start to move things in the right direction.
Right. So let's see. Let's repeat these. So first is who's the core customer, right?
Correct.
Understand who the core customers. Do you have enough data behind it to have a deep understanding who the core customer is? The second is, how are you going to win? What is it that they want? Understanding them, and how are you going to win with this specific core customer? I think you're absolutely right. A lot of people try to spread themselves thin and try to win everybody, and then as a result, you're diluting the experience for the few who really care about your brand. And I think I said the third thing you said was differentiate the experience, right?
Yeah. How are you going to come to life, right? How is that going to actually manifest? What's the spirit of it? And that's where a lot of the brand resonance really comes in terms of how you're going to show up as that brand.
Yeah. And this is something I read in a blog several months ago, which really hit me, and I have it up on my board here. It says, if you really want to know how good your product is, ask your users, if you discontinue it tomorrow, how will they feel?
Yeah.
Right. And that's a great question to ask, because those are your real true fans. And those are the people that you need to really please and make sure you're listening to them to convert them, and they'll become your brand ambassadors, and they're the ones who grow your business. So
yeah. And I think the other piece that's really interesting to us, and that I learned when I joined Jackman, is you focus on that one customer. There's going to be a couple of customer segments that are really close in adjacency that share some of those common threads. You'll naturally appeal to them by focusing in on that one customer, because there's some shared beliefs that sit underneath one another. And it's interesting when we do the work and we do the quantitative studies in order to unpack that, it really does bear truth, because you start to all of a sudden become much more magnetic, because your messaging is clear, what you're offering is clear, and all of a sudden it really starts to resonate.
I get it. And I think other people aspire to become the core customer that you address.
Yes, agreed.
It's kind of like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So yeah, fascinating. I'm loving this discussion. Gary, any questions here?
Yeah. So along that same line, what are some of the key factors you look for, or what are you seeing factors that sort of dictate success or failure amongst retailers or brands that go after some kind of reinvention strategy? But what dictates success or failure?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that really, if I reflect back, ring true. I think we've talked a little bit about leadership. That's certainly one of them. The second piece is the culture of the organization. We've been in a couple of instances in legacy businesses that have had high CEO turnover. Those have been really difficult for us because the organization culturally has really suffered. And it's almost like there's been too much change and too much overhaul, or the organization has really seen so much attrition over time that it's really a shell of its former self. And so there are some instances where that either hasn't worked or we've learned that lesson in the past and not gone through with the work together. I think the other piece that I would say, as a success factor is this, good connection between leadership teams and the field. When we have a good, tight connection, things become much easier to execute. The work that we do with leadership teams is not just about strategy, it's about bringing it to life. And so when we have a team that's sitting in a real disconnected spot, it's more of an ivory tower, or, these are the guys that have a different lens on what success looks like, because operationally, you have one set of metrics and corporately you have another. When there's too much of a disconnect there, we really find that hard to really move the business forward. And that's really been a challenge for us in the past. And so sometimes there's a bit of, work operationally to do to really make sure that that's being shored up in the near term.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, Sandra, this is a fascinating conversation. I mean, we bring in a lot of people on the retail perch who are either entrepreneurs in the industry on the front lines doing stuff. We talked to a number of retailers, but it's all. And we had a guest last week on the show from Microsoft, and I think what I find fascinating about these conversations with people who are looking, and you've been in the industry, but now you're kind of outside looking and helping transform it. I think it's you're much more objective in your view sometimes, right? Because you kind of see what's happening, and people who are vested and in a business are more emotionally connected to pursuing a certain path because that's how it's worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love this because I think you hit on, those last 3 points that you made really summed up the entire thing about how do you think about your business? If you want to change something, how do you change it? What's the motivation to change? It should always be customer centric, right? And Gary and I are big believers in the fact that customer centricity has to be the central focus of a business. The minute you stop being relevant to a customer and focusing on other things, you start losing people because it's a people business ultimately, right? And I'm sure that's comes up time and again in your conversation.
Yeah. The nice thing about being an outsider or consultant is that you're not mired by the intricacies of the organization, and that you are able to look at things in a very different plane than those that are, in it. And so it is a nice feeling to be able to kind of go in a bit more objectively, to your point, and just look at things and look at the data a little differently, and pursue some what ifs. And I think that's, it's always nice because we don't need to be the experts in a vertical or in a business. All we need to bring is our brain power, and the expertise on that vertical sits within that leadership team. So it's a great marriage.
Yeah. And, of course, the retailers are listening out there. We understand this is not an easy business sometimes. These guys are putting their hearts out, and they're working, and what they accomplished in the last 18 months to make sure the supply chains and people getting what they needed. We're deeply appreciative of this industry. But I think it always helps to have people like you who are able to offer that perspective. Yep. Right, and a sounding board, and kind of help transform. So yeah, it's been fantastic. I think the work you're doing is amazing. And how does somebody reach you, Sandra?
Sure, you can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm my profile is Sandra Duff at Jackman Reinvents. But you can also reach me directly if you want to drop me a line. Sandra.Duff at jackmanreinvents.com.
Fantastic.
Perfect.
Gary, any?
No, this has been great. Thank you for joining us today.
I appreciate it.
Great discussion. I really enjoyed it.
Make sure to join us every Monday and connect with us at the Retail Perch on Instagram and Facebook.
And if you have any questions, feel free to email us at theretailperch@birdseye.com.
Until next time, this is Shekar.
And this is Gary signing off.